After the success of our last video, the team and I decided to go back to the drawing board and try and understand what are the key misconceptions and misunderstandings when it comes to the trust. So what we've done is, we've consulted Google. I haven't seen these questions, I haven't obviously prepared any answers, this is going to be an immediate reaction video. But the key idea, the key intention behind this video is to try and demystify the concept of a trust, because these questions come up literally all the time. So hopefully this video is entertaining, it's interesting, and it helps to declassify and demystify some of the misconceptions around trusts. I hope you enjoy. Why are trusts used? I did actually try to answer this as part of the reaction video to Diary of a CEO. I think the common misconception is that trusts are purely a structure or a mechanism by which individuals avoid tax, and that trusts are these sort of terribly opaque structures where you don't know who has what or who owns what, and therefore it evades everyone and anyone. At least from a UK perspective, that isn't the case. I mean, as far as we're concerned, trusts are incredibly useful when it comes to succession planning. So let's take an example of an individual who starts a business, and as a result of starting that business, it becomes very successful, and then they get to a certain age of their life, they're married, they've got children, maybe one child is in the business, one child is out of the business. And there's then a question of, well, how do I make sure that each of my children are fairly looked after? But at the same time, there's a key consideration here, which is, okay, maybe child one is involved in the business, but they're in a relationship with someone who we don't necessarily approve of. And then there's a concern around directing assets outright to certain members of the family where, you know, shared assets of the family, shares in a business, might end up getting fragmented through divorce proceedings. Or another child is dealing with, you know, bankruptcy or drug and alcohol dependency issues. And then it's a question of, well, how do I actually ensure the longevity of this family business? How do I imbue it with family values that are not dissipated as soon as I pass it over to the next generation outright? So there are certain trusts that can be used which are very, very useful. So clearly a trust is not just about tax. In fact, and we might get into that in this video, trusts, at least from a UK perspective, have ceased to be particularly favourable from a tax perspective for a very, very long time now. It's really about that flexibility. It's really about making sure that wishes are complied with in a flexible manner, and succession planning really goes to the heart of it. So let's look at some more questions. Why are trusts so complicated? Well, it depends who you're asking. So I think if you don't speak the language of trust, then on the surface it might come across as complicated. But how they actually work is relatively straightforward. So let's just demystify a couple of things. So a trust is not an entity. It's not a thing as such. It's actually a relationship. And it's a relationship fundamentally between the trustees, the beneficiaries, and the assets that the trustees are holding or administering on behalf of those beneficiaries. So it is a legal relationship. The relationship is governed most of the time by a trust deed, which is a legal document that sets out who the trustees are, how they intend to act, and then outside of that you tend to find what's called a letter of wishes, and it's there just to influence, but it's not there to direct. It's not a set of rules. So you've got the trust deed, which is the key governing document, and then you've got the letter of wishes, which is this sort of guiding, persuasive, but ultimately from a legal perspective, non-binding document. It's like if you think about a computer programmer, someone that does coding. They are paid and they are hired to build some infrastructure, but ultimately what the ultimate customer wants to see is how it works. It's our job to ultimately build that infrastructure, and it can sound complicated because a lot of trust law, at least in this jurisdiction, is very, very old. You know, one of the key pieces of legislation is the Trustee Act 1925. And I think one of the reasons that lawyers often are looked at in a bad light is that we have this tendency to talk in legalese. We try our best not to do it, but often we're constricted by the legislation that we rely on to give advice to clients. So I think the key answer to that is, if you understand the code, it's not complicated. But yes, of course, from a layperson's perspective, the code looks complicated. The job of a lawyer that works on this sort of stuff, that puts these arrangements in place, it's actually to simplify things. And if someone comes to us and they've got complexity or they've got certain wishes, a trust in many, many cases will achieve the desired outcome. But yes, the language is a cultural impasse, let's put it that way. It causes potentially more problems, and it's up to the lawyer to demystify, to simplify, and to explain. Why are trusts so expensive? So look, there are some trusts that are by necessity expensive because of all the time that is spent. There are some trusts that are very straightforward. So for example, you might have a situation where you want to hold some assets for your child, but your child is 4, and you want to get those assets invested and get a bit of momentum on some of those investments over the next few years. So they've got a university fund, for example. Maybe the grandparents want to do that. So you will set up a very simple trust, which is called a bare trust. And a bare trust is effectively a very, very simple trust where there is a trustee. They hold those assets subject to the beneficiary reaching the age of 18. When they reach the age of 18, they become absolutely entitled, beneficially speaking. And they can take on what's called legal title as well. That is a very, very simple document. It's effectively a one-pager. So I think that certainly there are trusts that are complicated. There are property deals that are complicated. You know, if someone tries to buy this property behind, that's going to be far more complicated than buying a 3-bedroom house in North London. So there is a spectrum, and there is the less expensive end of the spectrum, and there's the more expensive end of the spectrum. But I don't think they are expensive per se. They are expensive or not expensive according to the necessity of the instructions. Why are trusts allowed? Well, I'd love some comments on this one, and please, if anyone has a view on this, why should they not be allowed? I will answer the question, but I'm just genuinely interested to understand what perspective leads to the question that they shouldn't be allowed. Because there's a negative that's implied into this, which is that in some way, the fact that trusts are able to be put into place and are able to be continued in place is because they are continuing some sort of wrongdoing. There's something that's implicitly wrong about these trusts. But let's look, for example, at what the UK has. So the UK has what's called the Trust Registration Service. The Trust Registration Service is a database of sorts, which is maintained by HMRC, the UK's tax authorities. And many, many trusts, whether they're taxable trusts or not taxable trusts, have to be registered on HMRC's Trust Registration Service. What does that mean? That means that ultimately there is transparency. Now, can you and I get access to the Trust Registration Service? No, we can't. So clearly, it's only open to certain institutions. But the idea is to break through all of the old connotations, but also where trusts have been used to hide assets or to bring about something that we would consider to be unlawful as far as our law is concerned, that we do away with that. So most of the time now, at least in this jurisdiction, trusts have to be registered. So they are allowed, but only within the confines of what is lawful. So that is the trust sphere. If you've got any questions on what is a trust, how it works, when I might think about using one, is a trust appropriate for X, Y, or Z? We do this for a living and we enjoy it. We're made up of a bunch of brilliant, personable, and energetic trust practitioners who also happen to know a few things about tax. So you will see from the questions that there's a lot of uncertainties and there's a lot of assumptions and misconceptions when it comes to trusts. Hopefully we've been able to clarify some of those misconceptions today and explain really that trusts have got lots of different uses, lots of different use cases. There is a sense that when you talk about trust, there's some illegitimacy or there's some flavor of tax avoidance that's implicit in what we're talking about. But the clients we deal with are driven and informed by lots of considerations. Naturally, when it comes to tax, individuals want to pay the right amount of tax or make sure they're not paying too much tax. I don't think there's anything wrong with tax efficiency, because that's just about following the law and making sure that you end up with the best outcome. That's not robbing HMRC of what they otherwise would have been entitled to. It's just structuring things in the correct way. But trusts have got lots of different purposes. I'm sure this will lead to lots of other videos, and if you've got other questions, we'll put them on the board for next time. I hope you enjoyed.